Good morning, and welcome to the Boonafide Experience podcast. I am your host, Kyle, but most people just call me Boona. This is an esports podcast that brings on talent from across the industry to be the spark that fuels passionate gamers to change the world. If you are new here or returning, please consider following and or subscribing to your platform of choice. Doing so allows you to stay up to date with the most current episode, as well as gets this content into the hands of gamers that need to hear it. I'm so humbled that you're here, and let's go ahead and get started with the show. Good afternoon, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
You know, I can't complain. It's nice and muggy here in Austin, Texas, or at least the part where I'm in. So it's kind of a nice day to sit inside and do a recording.
Yeah, no, I went out briefly today. I sold my old graphics card and went to HEB, and I was just like, oh, okay, this is something.
I mean, I feel like here in Austin, the weather, it's like I turn my heater on one day and then I have the air conditioning on the next day, you know?
Yeah, we are a big believer in we have like one of the Nest Learning thermostats, and we are a big believer in the heat cool method. So if it gets above a certain heat, it will cool it. And if it gets below a certain temperature, it will heat the house. So constantly have the thermostat set to heat cool this time of year because, yeah, it's either really, really hot or really, really cold. No in between. Yeah, Texas just doesn't ever want to get cold, so it tries to give us a glimpse of a glimpse of warm weather here and there. Yeah, true.
Yeah, man. I live in an apartment, so I wish that I could really install one of those in mine without messing up my terms and conditions or my lease. Because I'll tell you, when we got my father one of those, he just absolutely loved that feature.
I actually have I live in an apartment that came with one pre-installed, but I've actually installed one in an apartment and then just took it out. It's probably not as bad as you think because like the plates, like the like little cover plate thing, like I'm depending on the type of thermostat you have, you could just like basically hide it. Just like patching up. I've done a lot of drilling into walls in this place that I will have to do when I move out, and that's okay. The one thing about quarantine is I figured out how to patch a wall. I had a wall fall through on me while I was like cutting something, and the entire wall collapsed while I was mounting a TV. So I had to do that. So I've got it figured out. That's my quarantine project, is home improvement.
Oh, the joys of that. That's awesome. That's awesome. I've done quite a bit. I haven't done as much. I'm always too scared to do some home improvement just because like in my eyes, like my apartment's like, this isn't going to be my permanent living quarters. So I'm just like, I'm going to do as much as I can without doing that. But I actually reinvented my entire apartment during this process. So I can definitely relate on that front.
There you go.
Got to. Yeah. Spend all day at home. But anyway, pleasure to have you on. Just to, just for the people who don't know, for my audience, give a quick introduction to yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
My name is Jacob Wolf, and I am the Chief Reporter and Investigative Lead at a company called Dot Esports. I started working at Dot Esports again in January. For 4.5 years before that, I worked at Espn in their esports department as a staff writer. I am what I like to call capital J journalist, so I focus a lot on investigative journalism, breaking news, etc. My role at ESPN really was exactly what it sounded like, very much a writer role. That was primary responsibility, some on-camera work as well. I was fortunate enough to get to produce for SportsCenter and Outside the Lines during my time there as well, on a few different projects. But now, actually, my new role at Dot is really what I was looking to do eventually anyway, and this is to not only do my own work, but to also work with some of my less experienced colleagues and our freelancers and contributors to level up their work, sort of dive in further into reporting, help simultaneously educate. So I am not an editor in the sense of like I'm editing their pieces, but I have some sort of the like mentorship editor responsibilities on my plate also. So it's a hybrid role. I did a lot of on-air stuff my final year at ESPN. I'm doing less of that and more behind-the-camera work at Dot. Working on some other things as well, which I can't super dive into yet, but we'll be able to later in the year. But yeah, it's very unique. It's something you would not see at a traditional newspaper, but I also tend to think I'm a unique person with a unique life. So I'm happy to have a role was literally created for my interests. So I'm super thankful and 3 weeks in, really enjoying my new job.
Dude, that's fantastic. And I mean, and one thing I want to touch on is like you mentioned like a traditional a traditional position, like a traditional, publication company, a traditional website, like, can you highlight the difference of like what role you're in versus like what the traditional company looks like?
Yeah, I mean, at ESPN, like staff writer was sort of the entry level title for someone who published on our website or worked in the magazine. Every day you're like checking your beats, you're, like calling up sources, trying to find like what the next scoop is, or if you're a feature writer, like some of my colleagues, like you're working on these stories that could take anywhere from like a day to a couple weeks or whatever else. And I think that a lot of those roles exist within like the standard newspaper as well, because ESPN is structured a lot, at least ESPN.com and ESPN the magazine were structured a lot like a newspaper. There were a lot of our editors were former newspaper folks who were atop the org. Whereas, Dot is no longer a startup per se. Company's been around since, I want to say 2013 was their first year when they were part of the Daily Dot. And then in 2016, they were acquired by a company called Gamers. So they've been an independent thing for almost 5 years. I think it's 5 years in May or June. We've eclipsed sort of the profit threshold to no longer be a startup. So we're just an independent, medium-sized company, I think, at this point. But the like startup scrappy nature of like you have a job title, but you do a bunch of things still very much exist. And I like that a lot. I mean, I worked at the original Dot Esports when it was part of the Daily Dot group for about a year. And my boss then is now my boss now again. And so like there's an existing relationship and trust there. Like I haven't had to like build that up. He like trusts that I'm going to get what I need to get done and help where I need to help. And he's not like checking, clocking my hours or anything like that. And when there's times that I need to work above my hours, I do that. When there's times, this is a balance of like, sometimes there will be 60-hour weeks. Sometimes there will be 30-hour weeks. And you just like have to like bounce in between them and pace yourself and not burn out. So I think that's, my role now is not something that really exists. Probably the closest thing to what it would be if you were using a newspaper term would be editor at large, where somebody works on their own stuff and has some sort of business side input to it, a publication. But I'm probably not as business oriented as an editor at large, somewhere kind of in the middle. So, and kind of just figuring it out. The whole plan here for why I took this job rather than some of the others that I got offers for, was that I wanted to kind of grow, as well over a period of years. So that's what I'm looking forward to as we sit here now. It's been a lot different. Takes some adjusting to kind of bounce from a really traditional role into something like this, but I'm definitely up for the task and I'm enjoying it so far. That's
fantastic. I mean, I can absolutely relate to it. Having that like kind of scrappy startup nature where it's like you have a job title, but there's a lot of different things that you do. I work for LegalZoom, and we started a startup program within there, and it's like we saw it from start. We saw it right from the beginning, and it's just been an incredible amount of growth for this pilot project just turned into so much more. And I realized that like my role, I had 3 different job titles my first like 6 months there, because no one could figure out what to call me, what I did, but I was essential and it made it work. And I think there's a lot of, it's definitely a unique role. And I don't think it's for everybody because you could come in one day and do something completely different than you did yesterday. So it's, I can definitely relate to that. And I think that's a cool area that you have gotten to dive into. And it's honestly, in my opinion, what makes people a lot more unique and more desirable to work in places like this, because they have that trust and they know that whatever you're going to be thrown, it's just going to happen regardless. Yeah,
I'm an entrepreneur at heart generally. I like going out there and doing big things and like taking these really large swings, trying new things, experimenting, right? And some of those desires and itches were definitely not scratched during my time at ESPN. I learned a lot as a journalist, first and foremost, right? I worked with some of the best editors in all of sports. In some cases in all of journalism, I had writers who were legendary in my flank, like Seth Wickersham and Mina Kimes, right? These people are my friends and my former colleagues. And they are, when you work with people like that and you're able to shoot them a text or a DM and they get back to you really fast, you can learn a lot. There's a lot to take from it. But I did, we were ESPN Esports, the website vertical when it existed was definitely a startup within a big media company, but there were definitely times where, I would get involved in like, say, editing at BlizzCon a Sports Center hit that we need to put together, that we were tasked to put together as a team. And like, we were simultaneously told that if we didn't get our video equipment out of a press room, then it was going to be held till the next day by like event security. And so like our producer editor who was on the ground with us is like, I got to go get my stuff because this is like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of gear, company gear. And I was like, well, Sports Center needs us to have something in by this, certain amount of time or it won't run tonight. So like, I may be a writer, but I know how to video edit. So I sat there on my laptop and did it. And there was a superior over my shoulder who was like, kind of just like giving me the look. And I was like, look, like it's got to get done. Right. Like he needs his equipment and it's going to take him some time to tear it down by himself. And like Sports Center expects us to get this in. So like, I don't know what you want us to do. Like I definitely had some instances where it was like, that's not your job. And it's just like, it doesn't matter. Like it just needs to get done. Like it's not the person whose job is doing something else and they have their other responsibilities. So I definitely felt some of those pains while there. I'm super appreciative of my time at ESPN, but those itches are a lot more scratched now in a company where fluidity is everything.
Yeah, you're allowed to do that. I mean, and it's I think it's a really important thing because a lot of these massive companies, like they've been structured in this certain culture where it's just like it's very rigid with what the job requirements are. It's like you are hired as this, so this is all you do. And so I think people are so trained, and so I mean, I'll just be out like closed-minded around like doing something brand new that like when you throw a task like that, it's like this needs to be done regardless. So we just got to figure out how to make that happen. I mean, I think that's an art form. Honestly, it's lost in a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. We were the king of borrowers at ESPN Esports, like borrowing somebody else from something else on like their off time, and they just like wanted to contribute. Yeah, because we were a really small staff until our final year, so it was definitely it definitely took a lot of energy and work and doing a bunch of other things not in the job description. But right. I like that stuff. I like it. I see it as a growth opportunity for myself, really. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. And so one thing I want to touch on prior to hopping into some of my other questions is like, when it comes to Dot Esports, like as a whole, like, this is just some context from where this is coming from is that like, I see a lot of newspapers that are like, like a lot of like reading in newspaper form is a form of content that people aren't necessarily engaging with anymore. And a lot of newspaper companies are struggling to like, make ends meet and like figure out how to still deliver that same level of content. Like how does Dot Esports like thrive in this environment and go from a startup to like fully independent, like where they're. Sure. I mean, I will take no credit for this because this pipeline developed while I was not at the company, but like we are SEO kings in the esports and gaming space. Like the one thing about Dot Esports, the Dot Esports offering, if you open up our website or go to any of our game index pages, is that like you will find everything that's happened in that game or in esports in any given day. And we have a pipeline of like people who their primary responsibility, whether as a job or a contributor, contract contributor, is to literally write SEO articles that are SEO oriented, right? Like, so like, say there's something new about a game and people are like trying to learn how to figure it out, right? Like, and they like want the instructions. We have people that write articles about those things, and those things get a ton of inbound Google search traffic. That's not my job. It doesn't fall on me to do that. Like my job is to help build the company's reputation through good investigative journalism. But that is able to exist because we are making money off of the other stuff, right? Like the inbound traffic from SEO, the social media stuff. That's all really important. I agree that people don't read as much now, but I'm not a subscriber to the fact that it's so much the change of habit as it is sort of what is being written. So much of journalism has become quantity over quality. And I tend to think if you write a long form piece that is true quality, that where like a lead and a nut graph is punchy and concise and like it does what it's intended to do to hook someone in and hook them in and then tell them why they should read the rest of the story. Like I do think people read those things, right? Like, and I say that because I've seen articles go viral in that context. So like a very recent one was, and I think I mentioned this in the Light session earlier this week, that like there was a piece about Martin Shkreli and a reporter falling in love with him. And another reporter who was her peer wrote the story about this reporter sort of like falling in love with a source. And like the story went viral over the Christmas break. And it was a long article. And I bet you hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people read the entire thing because it was interesting, truly interesting. Whereas I do feel like a lot of long form writing, quote unquote, is very wiki, like Wikipedia type reading, which is quite boring. Or like it's just bad. It's just like the art form is somewhat lost. But I think the good ones do get readers. They really do. Like Mina Kimes and Jeff Passan just wrote a piece about the Mets general manager. Another really long piece by word length about the Mets general manager sexually harassing a reporter and a reporter who was a foreign correspondent from another country that came to the U.S. to cover baseball. And like the story was super long, but again, it was another one of those things that everyone was sharing because it was topical and well written and well researched and reported. So yeah, I think it's like a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. Like people don't read, but also they aren't necessarily given sort of the meat and potatoes to read as much anymore as they were once upon a time. That's a really good point because like I'll tell you, I didn't really start diving into a whole I'll tell you the last book, and this is kind of like I don't know if it's embarrassing or what, but I'll be fully transparent. Is like the last like actual book I read was The Two Towers back when I was in elementary school, Lord of the Rings, and it's like. Reading just hasn't been as appealing to me, but I didn't really know what the reason was behind that. It's like, what do we chalk that up to? And it's like, what you just mentioned is that we've honestly been so conditioned, or at least for me, I've been so conditioned to clickbait media. You know what I mean? Like where it's just like, there's just not a lot of good stuff there. And it's like, they want you to gravitate towards the video because that's the new thing, or like, it's easier to sell ad skins. It's really the base level of it. Yeah. It's like a brand ad in the corner of a video is worth more than an AdSense ad.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fantastic point. I'll tell you like that, what you said makes a lot of sense. And it probably, whether I knew it or not, is probably a good reason why I just never gravitated towards that, because it's just, if it's not good, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm reading right now is Bagman by Rachel Maddow, the nonfiction book. I was the same way. I didn't read a lot in high school or college or even at the beginning of my journalism career. But it was also because like fiction just doesn't really interest me. It's not really my cup of tea. Like nonfiction, investigative storytelling, etc. does. And the only reason I started reading again was because I like actively seek out now books that are of my interest, like that one, or some of the others that are behind me on the shelf. But unfortunately, like I think the education system has something to do with this, that you're forced to read things that are not of your interest. And so by the time you go out and become an adult and get, either get through high school or get through college, like you've read so much. But it's not garbage. It's well written, but it's also probably not something that actually interests you, that you just don't want to do it anymore.
Right. Yeah. We're conditioned to like, it's because we have to. And I think school teaches us a weird balance of like, there's things in life that you don't necessarily always enjoy, but like you do need to do. And I think they literally I think that's a literal element that they took and said, like, we just need to make that a blanket statement. Even if you don't enjoy it, you have to do this the entire time. Let's like, okay, let's teach you some elements like where you have to eat some dirt a little bit, or you got to do some things you don't want to do. Like that's just called being an adult. Like there's just things that suck and you got to do them. But I think you're exactly right. There was nothing of school for me, at least, that interested me. Like I did not want to read anything about any science books or history books, or like even these regular books that they share. It just didn't appeal.
Yep. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And I think it is. I think that alternative teaching methods are becoming a thing, but they're just not a thing quick enough. Yeah. Because like the people educating now are still the ones who had like the only way they know how to educate is the way that they were educated. And it's exactly what we just said. So I don't know. There are people who are visual learners. I think video medium and audio medium in particular is growing too. Especially pre-COVID when more people were commuting. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a lot of people bear responsibility for decrease in readership, both for literary medium and actual online medium too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a whole other topic we could discuss about that, but it's like, you know, want to switch gears into the realm of esports. You know, like this thing is esports is something I've always been extremely passionate about, but never knew how, especially as a kid, but never, it was just so early. And to be honest, it still is, knew how to really express that. Like, cause it's just like these little pockets of passion that you would always find. I feel like we're finally starting to bring this all together. You know, so what I'm really curious about is when it comes to like investigative journalism, you know, in the esports world with all the different forms of communication out there, like what is the primary function of that, and what purpose, you know, does that serve in the overall community?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one is like the biggest purpose it serves is accountability. Mm-hmm. You know, like the highest volume of storytellers right now in esports are first party storytellers, meaning like teams themselves, yeah. Right? There are teams like Team Liquid who have one-up studios who are literally owned by them, and they do some fantastic work, but like there's a certain level of things you will never see because it is owned by the team. And there are a lot of teams who are building content teams that mirror that in the Western world, in North America, in Europe, but there is so much going on that you don't see at all. Finances, scandal, corruption, whatever it may be, you know, sexual abuse, like all of that. And they're not going to tell those stories. It's terrible PR to do so. But it doesn't mean those stories shouldn't be told, period. Right? For the industry to grow, you also have to hold certain people accountable to what they're doing. And I think that that's the biggest need for investigative journalism in esports right now. Because that stuff certainly does exist. At the highest level, maybe not in the same volume it did when I started my career, because like the LCS, the LEC, the LCK, and the LPL have franchised. So there's a certain level, you have to have a certain level of wealth and experience to be in those teams or in those leagues. But
sure.
Doesn't mean it still doesn't have it in smaller volume. And I also very much believe that it happens in other games that are more open, like Counter-Strike and Dota and others, where the system is very open. And not only on the scandalous part of it, just like the people in games in general, not just esports, tend not to talk about finances, except when they are very fluffy and boost your investment profile, right? And that's wrong, in my opinion. Like, I think finances should be player contracts, franchise fees, etc. should be a more public thing. And I've taken it upon myself where I can to do that for leagues like the Overwatch League and the Call of Duty League in particular. And yeah, to me, I think that it's really important right now for that. And I think most people, and this is why I do things like in Light, I think most people just don't know where to start with actually diving into becoming an investigative journalist. I constantly am trying to be a resource, not only to the people I work with, but other publications and people starting that career for themselves too.
Absolutely, man. And I think you bring up a fantastic point, because I mean, like, one thing that is the topic of a lot of people's, I guess, curiosity or like peak curiosity is around finances, you know, in esports, because it's just like, you know, we all, at the end of the day, we all have to eat, right? You know, so like, it's like, how does esports really make money, you know?
Correct.
And so I think that's a very good topic to cover on, or to like to at least expose for what it is, because in my opinion, you know, is that I feel like there's too many people that are trying to hit the gas pedal to the floor versus just lightly accelerating in esports, because like the sports didn't become where it was overnight. You know, if you look at like traditional like baseball, football, basketball, like it took time to like build up a league. It took time to like get these people paid. It took a long time, but I think that we are so desperate to like become relevant that like if we don't put our foot on the gas pedal, then the people are just going to forget.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Travis Gafford retweet the other day an Esports Insider article about the Morgan Stanley report about the Overwatch League before it launched, saying that it can make $790 million in league revenue in 1 year. And I just like laughed my ass off, to be perfectly honest, because I remember that report when it came out in 2017, and it was bullshit then and it's bullshit now. But it was peddled, I don't know this backstory of how that report originated, but I will say that I got it from a Blizzard source, which should tell you all you need to know. Because the headlines of the report were out there, but the actual report itself was private and confidential unless you pay for it. And like I said, I got it sent to me by a Blizzard source, which should tell you what you need to know. And to me, peddling stuff like that is totally unfounded and speculative is very dangerous in a league that now has pretty significant financial concerns, right? Like the Overwatch League is still the most costly franchise league in all of esports, and in a game that's player base is dwindling the longer things go and go. So I think it's important to talk about those things. But for so long, gaming has just been access based, and the distinction between journalism and content creation is very narrow, and it's difficult. It can be really hard to convince people why journalism is important, and I try to do that both publicly and privately. So I don't know, but it's super necessary. I do think it's necessary to keep it in check. I'd rather we grow slow than grow fast and lie to get there. Be real about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's this thing about if we don't, there's a lot of people here, and I think that the more we talk about this, it makes a lot more sense. It's a common problem is people have skills that esports would benefit from, but if we don't truthfully expose the problem, if we're not honest about what the problem is, how are these people going to apply their skills to actually solve these problems? Yeah. And it's there's a lot of gray area about people want to get into this industry, but they don't know how, because no one's clear on what the problem is, and no one's clear on how they fit into this puzzle piece.
Correct.
No, and I think that you brought up a good point there, though. When it comes to journalism over content creation, what is from your view, or from a literal definition, what is the primary difference between those two?
I think the objective is the primary difference between the two. There are a few things that derive from the objective, like ethics and standards, but really the objective is the big deal. The objective of journalism is the truth comes first, and the people you are serving is the public.
Yeah.
It's not about money. It's not about making someone making a subject happy. It's about informing the public, educating the public, providing them necessary information, and the only people you have an obligation to as a journalist is the people who write your checks and the people who read your work. Whereas content creation is, and this may be a little harsh on some, but it is really, the objective is to pay your own bills. Truthfully, right? It's pad your own pocket, get views to do that, and build your wealth. And there are some people who like to try to play both sides of the fence and be a content creator and a journalist. And I think that's wrong. And I do think that esports journalism has a long way to go to be competitive in pay and livable for a lot of people. So it's why things like content creation or PR, for example, which are a lot more stable financially right now, make a lot of sense for people who are coming out of communication school. But I journalism, to me, is a very noble thing. I think I'm probably a little different than most people in my age group in that regard. But I'll put it this way. I just went through a job search process of almost 2 months where I had some people who would have given me a glaring conflict of interest if I worked for them, and wanted me to be a journalist, and were essentially handing me a blank check. And I could have self-enriched and sold out and made a ton of money, and I didn't. I went and worked for a company who, to me, again, I knew the guy that I work for now from working with him in the past. I know what type of person he is from an integrity perspective, and I believe the publication I work for now is integral and does good work and holds a certain level of standards to everything we do. Whether it is that SEO-oriented content or if it's the investigative journalism, there's a certain level of standard to be held. it's not just all clickbaity shit. And I think that that's important, right? Like I think like and I'm 23, going on 24. I have all the time in my life to make money and save and invest and become wealthy. And that is not my priority, but that is the priority for some. And like money is the motivation for some people. It's not for me, and so be it. But I do think the objective of like what you're after is really the big distinction. And everything else kind of spins out from that.
Yeah, I mean, and you touch on like esports is in the grand scheme of things, it's small potatoes compared to like the rest of like when you put it in scale of the entire world. It's like I think as the internet grow, I mean, it's kind of hard to believe with everything that's happening now. Is like the internet is still in its infancy. You know, like we are still very new to this, and it's very like the more we keep going, the more problems get exposed from the internet. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like our problems become very amplified. You know. And I don't think we haven't had these problems per se, but like our problems have become a lot more in our face because it's that accessible, you know?
Yeah. A big problem right now with journal, I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's something to navigate with, I guess. Is the idea of a star journalist is really new.
Yeah. And
it's in part because of Twitter, right? Like, if you're a journalist that has like, I'll take, for example, someone like Yashar Ali, right? Who's a freelance journalist. Yashar's a social media star. Like, dude's got hundreds of thousands of followers. He freelances and writes and produces across a bunch of different places. But he someone would 100% pay him high six figures if he wanted a full-time job. I fully believe in that because he's a social media star. And I will tell you that many publications, having worked for one, a big one for 4.5 years, who has a big name of their own, a lot of these publications, newspapers, traditional publications, etc., who are important in their own right, they struggle to realize why that audience matters. I think that when you, like, why an individual person's audience matters rather than their own. I think a lot of younger watchers, readers, audience, whatever, that engage with these journalists on social media, like Yashar, Mehdi Hassan, Maggie Haberman, like that level of celebrity journalists. I think that the reason that people engage with them is because they like them as people. Many of them are their true selves, either on TV or in their writing or in their own tweets. And so people engage with them. I believe that like more people like me because I'm myself on social media than just being a content robot. And so, I could have gone and worked for a traditional publication rather than an independent publication, and I could have had some big name on my resume again for the second time in a row. But like, I truly believe that more people care about me than they ever cared about, or at least more people in esports care about me more than they ever cared about the name ESPN.
Yeah. And
maybe that's an arrogant thing to say, but like, I think it is already shown, and I think it will continue to show that like people read my work at Dot Esports or ESPN. Doesn't matter. If it's, not a big newspaper with a big name or whatever else. Like, there's a level of audience that would read my work, but I think the audience of people who read my work because I'm me is pretty large. And I think a lot of publications struggle to acknowledge that. They like struggle to deal with like, how can an independent journalist have their audience of their own rather than our big publication name? You see things like Substack working because of this, actually, frankly. Why people are allowed to just go fully independent like that. And charge $5 or $10 a month because people want to read them. Yeah. They feel connected to their people from social media.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's kind of funny how the two world, like, even though journalism and like content creation are completely separate, like we see there's some very big similarities, like especially in the sports scene, like esports and sports, where like in order for people to put eyeballs on esports, they have to know the story. Like the people who do this the best is Hex and Optic and now 100 Thieves. I mean, like, they are such masterful storytellers, and they give you an in-depth look at all these individuals' lives, which feel like there's stories going on in COD that have been happening for 12 years. Right? Like, yeah. So I think that's I think that's a really cool thing because it's, there is a difference, but when you try to mix the two together is when it gets very like
murky and
weird.
Yeah, I mean, like, I appreciate what they do, but one company that I'm curious how they'll deal with this is Esports Talk. Like Jake is really talented.
Yeah.
The audience that he's built is quite significant.
Yeah.
He's been with that company since basically the beginning, but like there is this line of, and they are hiring people who write for their website that are journalists. But I would not classify Jake himself nor that YouTube channel as journalism. And it's this like, you have to figure out kind of where you're at. And it is a really murky ethical thing. Like I'm not calling them out because I think what they do is important, good work. I think a lot of content creation is good work. But it's not journalism, and it's figuring out how you distinctly separate between the two is really hard. I think a lot of companies are struggling with this. I mean, I saw as an outsider, I see ESPN struggling with this in terms of there are people at ESPN who are big capital J journalists, and then there are people that are TV talking heads or like columnists, right? Who like are just out there saying kind of whatever. And it is a hard balance. It's a really hard balance for every company, I think, that is in the content and media space.
Well, again, I think it goes back to like, and this goes beyond like any job description, any job, like it just goes to basic human nature of like this rigidity that I think we're softening up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that we're loosening, like we don't really, I think we're starting to understand that we don't need to have lines, that not everything is going to be the same in one situation versus another. You know, So I think, and that's a very scary place to become, because it's comfortable for people to have lines. And everyone's got to have their own boundaries, but like this line of like, you know, what's right and what's not, it's going to change on a case by case basis. And how do you define that, right? You know, and I think that's it's another thing that like, you know, I don't think we're going to be getting there anytime soon, but I think this is one of the biggest starts of that, if you will, you know? But yeah, man.
We're gone from the point of like, with a select few in this category, we're gone from a point where like a newspaper can just be a newspaper, right? Like they have to broaden the horizons, and we've seen some of them do that quite successfully. I mean, the New York Times has
killed
a ton of issues, but simultaneously they also have The Daily, which is the most successful podcast in the world, and like they just acquired Serial, which the Serial studio, so like they will continue to push into something like that. You know, they've done like this Showtime thing about Trump's first 100 days. Like I'm sure they'll do something similar with Biden. Like it's they're having to like, they can't just be a print newspaper for the city of New York. Like they have to figure it out, and the companies that are not reinventing quick enough are the ones that are failing, and the ones who are figuring it out. The Washington Post, I feel like, is the Times knows what the Times is. I feel like the Post, I admire them a lot as a paper because, they are owned by a tech oriented, a guy who made millions in his fortune off of tech. So I think that the ownership perspective is a little different. But yeah, like I think that paper is like, they have the ethics of the Washington Post, really, literally being the people to break the Pentagon Papers and Watergate. But they also are adjusting and finding their business, and I root for their success, knowing a lot of the people that work there. So I think it's an interesting time for content at large, and I think that esports is a subsection of that.
Yeah. I mean, because we're seeing it. Sorry about my dog's barking in the background.
It's all good.
But it's like. It's something that's been on my mind a lot, especially with a lot of the current issues. Is like, you know, this is a little bit off topic, but I feel like it's relevant to what we're speaking about. Is like these companies having personalities. It's like companies taking stances. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing. Like, you know, you have the company, and then you have the individuals of the company. You know, and so you have like, should companies take stances? Should they not? You know, like, because there's a lot of things internally that like, should it be exposed? Should it not be? You know, could that ruin someone's career with cancel culture, whether it's true or not? You know, it's like there's all these different like these different elements to it. And I think it's just I don't know, man. Like I get divided on it. One day I think that we should, and there's other days I don't think we should. You know, because I try to put myself in those perspectives. Like, what if it happened to me? And you know, like what would that look? What would that mean? Yeah. You know. So
yeah.
It's good, man. But yeah, that's honestly, it's probably not for this podcast. But one thing another kind of broader topic I wanted to ask you, or something specifically to esports. You know, when it comes to journalism, you know, where like in the way information gets disseminated from the source to the audience, you know, are there any other because you have journalism, but what other roles of media depend on journalism for their own livelihood or their own content?
I would say it's even bigger than just content. I mean, think about like what would financial trading look like without like Bloomberg, right? Like Bloomberg is journalism, but they have a journalistic arm, but they're educating people on how to trade, right? Like it's a necessary thing. Same with like Barron's and some of the other financial publications that become even more relevant in the GameStop era to a much larger audience this past week and a half.
Yeah.
But I think that there's so much like for esports business journalism alone. Like there are investors out there that I know because they read my work, right? Like they're like trying to educate on like where they should move their money, right? Where they should put their money. I think it's important too because like if someone gets exposed for doing something corrupt or abusive or whatever else, like that speaks to like it's important for people who are trying to figure out who they want to work for, right? Like assessing the professional opportunity. Like, do you want to work for an environment that is abusive or in an environment that's abusive and toxic? Probably not. So like that's I think that there's a lot that relies on journalism. Like journalism's super important. And that's always what I try to like educate. So much of my job now, and I don't want to take all the credit for this, but I did have so many of these conversations early in my career, like journalism in esports and games as a whole is super controversial. Like I look at someone like Jason Schreier and what he's doing right now at Bloomberg, what he was doing at Kotaku before, and I admire the hell out of it, even though like he doesn't cover esports, he covers games at large. Yep. Because he's like he's breaking down some walls. Like he's persona non grata at a lot of these at a lot of these publishers and game developers. But good for him because like he should be the standard, right? Like there's a level of like media education that exists in politics or sports or whatever else, these more developed, longer interest in topics and industries that does not exist in games or esports. So like good for him. Like I root for that man's success and his work. But like when I first got into it, like there were a lot of team executives, league executives, etc., who hated journalism, hated its guts. And I would see people like Richard Lewis fighting with these people on social media super frequently. And it would just become like a shit flinging fest. And I took a different approach, and I think it's benefited my career for doing so. Rather than poo-flagging at them on social media, which I did do at times, I would try to seek these people out in person, have an off-the-record conversation, try to reason with them, right? Explain to them why I believe this is important, right? Like highlight to them how it could, while certainly it could be detrimental to their business, it has opportunities to also be beneficial to their business, right? It's a push and pull. And I think I have succeeded in that. I think that there are LCS and LEC executives who are better because we have had those conversations and how that they treat all media, not just me. But God knows it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of very awkward and uncomfortable conversations to get there. Journalism is necessary. It is a necessary good, in my opinion. I don't like the word necessary evil, but it is a controversial thing in games and esports at large. But I'm constantly trying to kind of have those conversations. And we've also just seen like what it means to be an esports executive at the highest level right now. Like a lot of these people have worked in other industries before they come in, law, media, Hollywood, whatever else it may be, investments. So they understand the media a lot more than some of their predecessors. But some of the most powerful people in esports are people who've literally been in nothing else. And they've been here the whole time. Like they're the old guard. And again, it's hard to convince some of those people why it's important. But like I try to seek them out, and I try to have those conversations. Pre-COVID would always make a habit of seeing these people in LA and grabbing off the record lunch or drink or whatever else and really dive into that. And I think it's important. And I hope that I encourage and am encouraging other journalists to do the same for themselves. But I try to be pretty broad in the strokes that I paint to these people.
Yeah, I mean bring up a fantastic point, because it's like you're not always covering. Everyone wants to portray some sort of image, and like your job isn't to portray the image; it's to portray like the truth. And so it's natural to, I'm sure, get some of that feedback. My dog is losing it. It's okay. But I think it also goes to the fact that like what you're doing is incredible work, and also you're not going to change the world like in tomorrow. I mean, like conversation, correct, regardless of what. And I think it's a very important thing today is like change is not fast, regardless of what the topic is. And the deeper root of the issue, the longer it's going to take to change. And I think it starts with like this like education and convincing piece of just like of like saying, hey man, like here's the problem, here's the potential solution, and here's like what it could do for you, and I think people aren't going to be interested unless they know what's in it for them, so I think it's fantastic, man, and it highlights a lot of the importance of that. I'm sorry, my dog got me so off topic here, but I want to do a little bit more personal, deep dive into you. Is like when you mentioned you're 23, and I mean for someone of your reputation and status, like honestly, when you told me that initially, I was shocked. Like I'm just like, holy shit! Like that's what an incredible career, and you're not even 25. You haven't lived a quarter of a century. Like one thing that really grabbed me in that Enlight talk was that your beat found you. Like when you got into the industry, like how did that? What do you mean by that? You know what I mean? Like what do you like? How did that whole process work?
Sure. So, I mean, I, like so many people my age, I grew up a gamer. Earliest memories for me were like getting a Game Boy Advance on Christmas one year, getting an Xbox on Christmas the following, and it was such a big part of my life. Like I try to crack at YouTube in its early days when like Machinima Realm and Machinima Respawn were really big back in the day, and like was submitting videos to them, and I could just never really break in. Like I like had a channel and of me doing like Let's Plays and stuff, and it was fine. Like I did some freelance editing for some people and made some money as a young teenager, but like I could never really give a crack at it. I did some work in the music industry, ran a couple different record labels as a teenager, ran a management company, which is certainly abnormal, but like I'm thankful because like I made a ton of mistakes. I did some really awful things, but I did them in a environment where like, yes, I regret them now, but I also learned from them.
Right.
Like, people do terrible things and they grow.
Yeah.
If they're good people at the end, right? Like if they really want to get through it and grow and be better. So I am not a saint, and my life has not been, all great. But the things that I did, like I learned from them and I moved on. And while I was in the music industry, someone that was working for me at one of the labels that I ran was a guy who was super into League of Legends. And I had been primarily into like Call of Duty and Halo and a few other things. And had watched online Call of Duty competitions because some of the people I would play against on ladder back in the original MLG days were these pros. Sort of the more veteran guys, Scump, Crimsix, Clayster, etc. And it's funny because I cover them now, and the occasional time they'll remember me or remember the username. But yeah, they, I like was too young to do what they ended up doing. They were like, most of them are 3 or 4 years my senior, which is a big difference being 13 and being 16. Yeah. Or being 14 and being 17. Yeah. Like I was super engaged with that and that community and people like Nadeshot and Hex and Hitch and CNanners, etc. Kind of that group of people. But I like just was too young to break in as a pro and too young to break in really as a content creator. So I got into League of Legends in 2012 through this guy that was working for me at my record label, and we are still very close friends, me and him. But he started getting me into League, and I like played, and I had played a little bit before in beta, but didn't really like it. And I feel like League back then in particular was a game you didn't get into unless you had friends that did it. It was a jarring experience to play alone in the original days, but
I've heard
having
it still
that one
is.
friend. Yeah, it is. I think it's overwhelming now more than it is jarring.
Gotcha.
In the beginning, it was jarring because it was just abnormal.
Gotcha.
But back then, it was better to get in with friends. I got into it with him, and I watched the season 2 World Championship that year, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. That was the first year they had it in LA at the Galen Center, USC. And it's funny because I've interviewed Riot people about that. And they're like, that was their it moment. And I was having the same it moment, but at home on my couch as a 15-year-old. While they were working the event. And that was when I like knew this was a thing that I was really interested and passionate about doing. But I was still 15 and I just couldn't. So without the intent of esports, more the intent of just frustration. I have a lot of family background that made me want to grow up a lot faster, and
Gotcha.
Trauma is a good motivator for me. I'll put it that way. And I wanted to get out of high school as quickly as possible. I wanted to go to college, thinking that would fix my desire to move on in life. It didn't. So like at 15 in 9th grade, I went to my school counselor, and was like, I want to accelerate my time here, get out. I was in this weird position of like, I wasn't like super popular, but I also wasn't like bullied or really anything. I was in this like middle, like was friends with the popular people, was friends with the bullied people, but not either myself. And kind of distanced myself because I just didn't care about social activities other than sports. And so I created a path, first person in my county to do this, where I would basically graduate at 16. So I would do an extra semester in between 10th and 11th grade, and then I'd be done. And I would go, I would do 11th and 12th grade fully in college, fully dual enrolled, which was only an option ever to 12th graders. So I did a full extra year early, and then I'd like go straight into be 2 years ahead in the college path. During that period, at 17, I started wanting to write about esports after the season 4 World Championship, which was another kind of like turning point moment of like that's the Imagine Dragons South Korea Olympic Stadium year. Yeah. And I was just like, Jesus, like I want to be a part of this. And so I had been reading Thorin and Richard Lewis and Kelsey Moser and Emily Rand and Drexen. I added Drexen on Twitter and was like, hey, I'd like to write for Esports Heaven, because I actually called into Richard Lewis's talk show, and he followed me on Twitter after that. And I asked him where I should write, and he directed me that way. And so I added Drexen, volunteered, wrote for free for a few months, and some of those like extroverted business skills that I learned in music, I sort of just applied to esports, networking with people, adding people on Facebook at the time, getting to know them, and information started to come my way. And that's how my beat found me, because I was a writer who, by natural sort of networking interest, started to get information that other people did not have. And it happened really fast. I think my first big report was probably 2 months into me writing.
Wow.
I had no clue what I was doing. And, but like 5 months in, I got my first contract gig at the Daily Dot. And that was like, and Kevin Morris, who's my boss now and was my boss at the time, really helped me hone what I had, very raw talent, into something that was good. And a year there got me to Espn. So like I grew really fast, far faster than most people. And 4 or 5 months into working at the Daily Dot, like that summer I had made the bet with my mom that like if I could make this a livable thing and up my hours enough to make a livable wage, like I'd drop out of college and do this full time. And I did. And so it's weird to be 23 years old and have 6 years of work experience. But I did. And it's been a really accelerated life path.
That's and you know, you touched on a couple good points, man, that I don't think a lot of people in our, I guess you call it demographic or age range, understand, is there like, you know, this path that's like coming into esports, where it's just like, what I heard in the very beginning of the story is you worked 4 months for free. Nobody is willing to do that these days. Like everyone wants like the lifestyle of like this, whether it's their passion job or their dream job or their whatever the case may be. But like no one is. That's one of the most important pieces. I don't think like if you're not willing to do that, then your passion's misguided. You know?
Yeah.
Like
I don't like. I always try to. We have some writers at Dot who this is their first time ever freelancing for anything, ever writing.
Right.
Where like they're in J school and they're doing this kind of on the side and learning on the job while also educating themselves. And we do pay them. Like we don't have anybody that writes for free. We have a pretty standard freelance rate. It may not be a lot in some cases, but it's something.
Yeah.
I think working for free is fine if you can do it. I think many people cannot. I was fortunate. I was living at home, didn't have to worry about expenses. I was in college. I could do this on the side, right? And so I didn't need the money. I think some people, like, they need it to actually live and put food on the table. But, I think if you're able to, you have to prove to people your value, really, ultimately. If you can make $20 an article or $30 an article while doing that, sure. Like I did have some freelance stuff where I made like $500 on because I freelanced for Chieffinity and the Score, and I made $500 an article because it was a per view thing with Chieffinity, so I literally capped it. Thank you, Reddit, for making me $500 an article. And then I made like $200 an article off the Score for writing for them once, and then got like a flat stipend while working at Dot the first time that increased based off hours. And so like it's a balance, right? Because there are plenty of people that will take advantage of you if you work for free. Sure. But also like you kind of have to prove that you have worth. I will always remember I had an executive at Esports Heaven when I got my Dot offer. I had a lot of loyalty to Esports Heaven. I was like ascending into like kind of what I do now is helping like rebuild part of the site and all these other things. And he essentially like flat out told me you'll never be worth more than $500 a month. And I will always remember that because not only did Dot end up paying me more than $500 a month when I took that job, but like I make more than $500 a month now. And also I will always remember somebody telling me that because he was used to taking advantage of people for free, and I got the experience I needed and then found what was next. But yeah, it is a balance. Don't let people take advantage of you, but also you have to prove your worth.
But again, it goes back to that, like, there's no like one way, like there's no one size fits all. You know what I mean? It's like, and so I think where I was more coming from is like, coming from my perspective from someone who helps people. I was a business coach, essentially for the past 3 years. And it's like so many people like want to just give up everything and go all in on a business. And it's just like, when you have no business experience, it's just not practical. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like, okay, you hate your job. Great. A lot of people do, but you still are living off of it, right? You can pay a wage and there's ways to grow into that. And so I think that's kind of where more I was coming from versus like the common, like, I'm going to quit my job and go and,
don't do that.
No. And I can't tell you how many people, without telling me they did that, that's exactly what they did. And after the first phone call, when I brought some very big realities to their doorstep, never heard from them again,
I mean, I think I'm working on some stuff outside of my current job, and worked on some stuff outside of my ESPN job when I had it. And like, I worked more than 40 hours a week. Like I would do the 40-hour a week that I needed to do at my actual job. And then the committed hours, weekends, evenings, etc. Like I'd stay up and do what else I needed to do. Like do it that way. Like if you can't, I'll put it this way. If you can't bring yourself to do those extra hours for what you're passionate about, you're probably not really that passionate about it, frankly. Yeah. Right. Like does it suck? Sure. But like, if you want to switch careers and you want to jump into something else and actually make money off of it, you probably need to be doing it on your off hours to start to build that path that you want to walk at the beginning, at least. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's an exhilarating thought to like, just leave everything. You know what I mean? Like everyone's. Oh, yeah. I can't, but. Yeah. It's not practical. You're right. It's not practical at all. There's some people that can do it, but what you don't know is that they've ran 3 to 4 businesses in their past, or they have real experience and real connections, and they just exactly. They have the investor that will front to keep them afloat. Right. Like that's the difference. Yeah, man. Yeah. So I want to start wrapping things up a bit here.
I know one of your, especially in the role that you're in, you know, you've had, like I said, you had 6 years of work experience in a very brand new industry that's still, honestly, in my opinion, still in its infancy. And one of your roles, or one of your, from what I hear, is a passion is like, you know, being able to help, you know, these up and coming journalists like get to either a position where you're at or to help grow the industry as a whole. You know, what are a few things that when you first started in here that you wish you would have heard from someone in your position?
I'm fortunate that like 4 months in, I ended up working with Kevin, who even when I worked at Espn, still considered one of the best editors in the industry. I mean, his background is not in esports. Again, another one of those people that transitioned into the industry. I mean, he's been doing esports now for 7 years, 8 years, but he's also is older and has a lot of life experience, worked at ABC before that, taught at Ithaca College, has a master's degree in journalism from Syracuse, right? Like checks the boxes of traditional journalists pre-esports. So I got some blunt realities myself. My first year of this, I still got blunt realities now, but I got a lot of them. My first year of working for him in 2015. But I think the big thing, something that I and a piece of advice I always try to pass is don't make this transactional. So many less experienced journalists are transactional. Whether that be like, I call someone, I need information, I get a press release, I write it, right? Like this is a industry because so many people in games are used to like, I call them vultures, or people who swipe in and take the money and run, right? Like they're so used to people leeching off of their thing. And they're also have so many people that work in games have the trauma of being the bullied kid for being a gamer in school, right? Like if you're old enough, you probably have that experience. And so they are really hypersensitive to people that they perceive as swooping in and taking. If you are able to have that relationship of, you know, being able to help them when they need it, or being able to like, I'm not saying pay anyone for anything because that's super unethical, but in terms of like someone needs some information or something that you can give to them without breaking your ethics or your standards, like do it. You know, like it sounds stupid and it's sometimes it can't be, but like happy birthday text or congratulations text on an engagement or a baby or whatever else. Like that means something to people. Like life advice means something to people, and none of that's breaking your ethics or standards. Like that's just being a human being, and people appreciate it, and they'll remember that you did that thing for them. And in turn, right, like don't do it with the intent of eventually milking it. Just do it because you want to be a good person. Yep. But people, it goes a long way for people when you're genuine. And that like has been so beneficial to me in my career. I wish I would have known that earlier, because for the first year of my career in particular, I was really transactional. And it worked sometimes, but I could have grown even more than I did, faster than I did, with better sources and a bigger network. I am fortunate. The biggest thing that I will thank is right place, right time for me. I got into esports before all the millionaires and billionaires showed up by about a year. I was about a year early to before that happened, before it started. So the people that I did build relationships with went to work for those millionaires and billionaires. And so now those billionaires and millionaires are in my phone as my contacts and are one text away because I like got vouched for by the people that now work for them, but were atop the industry at the time. You can't do that anymore as a less experienced journalist because those people do run the industry. But like if you behave appropriately and you are a human being, I still tend to think those people will open up to you also. Because I know other journalists who have the same sources as me, not because they've told me, but because like the person that I'm talking to is like, oh, I also talked to this person. And I'm like, like, yeah. But I also know that how those people operate and that they are not, you know, a transactional nature of their relationships. So I think that's super important. I think it would have been harder for me to break in now than it was then. But I don't think it's impossible now. I think it just takes a little bit more work, and it takes different type of work than it did back then for me.
Yeah, 100%, man. No, I think that's fantastic. And, you know, Jacob, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time with me today. This has been awesome. And so for the people who aren't following you, where are you the most active? Where can they find you?
Most active on Twitter for sure. It's just at Jacob Wolf, really short, simple, and sweet. Esports.com is our publication. I'm going to be publishing less volume, I think, this year than I have ever before, but I hope that people will take away that It's all really important work and stuff that I'm really passionate about writing. So yeah, I would say those are the two places that are most important. And I'm an easy to contact person if anybody needs to.
Cool, man. Hey, Jacob, again, really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too.